On today's show, we'll answer some interesting design systems questions from the internet. What keeps design systems folks up at night? We found some good stuff and have some thoughts to share. I'm Michelle Chin, a design advocate, and I'm joined by a guest co host, Dave Darns, a developer advocate. We're both advocates at zeroheight, the design system management platform, and this is Design Systems WTF. All right. We scoured the internet for some interesting questions. I guess let's start off in terms of like a career take, maybe. Um, so I found a question on Reddit um, from the user Chambun or Shambun. I don't know. The subject is leaving design systems, and they say, I have been working on design systems for a while now, and I am thinking of moving back to a feature team. I, however, feel like I am now pigeonholed. Anybody make the move out of systems into features? If so, how did you do it? And are you happy with the decision? Thanks. Interesting.
This is interesting because I just did that kind of. I mean, arguably I just did that. I worked for about 2 or 3 years on a design system like full time. And now I've moved into like more advocacy, though I've cheated. Like obviously still doing design system stuff, so I still have my at least a toe in the water. Um, but it's an interesting thought of like kind of having to make that switch. Um, what I was going to do is I was going to look up. There was an article I think I sent you actually, Michelle, when I first like started. That was from Robin Rendell.
Oh, yeah.
Robin Rendell's like a designer developer person who's worked on design systems in the past, and then now works on like feature development work. I think I might be getting that wrong, but they have a really good article about this, which I will find and try and slot into the show notes. Um, that is to do with they completely understand like the value and the good work that you can do in a design system and as part of the design system team. But the frustrating part about being in a design system team is that you have to like constantly pitch to say the value of it and the value of your work, despite knowing it is valuable work. Like the people in the know it, but you've got to sell it to like other people within the company. Whereas when you work on feature development, you're selling it to you kind of have to just end up selling it to customers anyway. Like you don't have to sell like product features to the rest of the team because they're all on board anyway. So I find it like an interesting thing because design systems work can end up very meta. It's quite hard to like sell it. So maybe that fueled their kind of choice.
Yeah. Like, I kind of wonder, what they don't like about being on a design system team. Um, and I would assume that maybe they did do feature work before. Um, I find it rare for people to just start their careers out doing design systems and then but yeah, I think it's interesting because I think it also depends on how you pitch your skills. Someone might think, "Oh, all you do is make components in Figma or code components and that's all your skill set is in." But I think being a design system maker, you're thinking more systemically, like across product. So it gives you like that ability and skill set to kind of really consider lots of different aspects that could help improve the design of a feature. So if you did move out into feature work, I think you could adjust really well.
Mm.
But yeah, I think I can definitely see where design systems can be a slog sometimes compared to feature work because you're not having to sell feature work nearly as hard. You're just doing the
Yeah,
feature work, right? So
yeah, you're just doing the work, which you know it's it's arguable on like what where the value lies or where the importance lies. Like, but yeah, the article from Roman Rendell, I found it. It's called "The Other Side," and it's a really interesting read. I recommend it. It's kind of maybe from my perspective and like other perspectives who have worked on design systems in the past and then aren't anymore. It's kind of cathartic or validating to kind of have those feelings of like trying to sell the design system as a thing. So yeah, I put it in the comments, but we've put it on the show notes as well.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think, yeah, it depends. It's almost like if you decide to leave agency and go back into in-house or vice versa. If you're in-house and you go back to agency work, it's quite a different switch. And I think a lot of people often wonder, but I think like, it can be a stressful decision, but at the same time, like know that you can always go back. Um, yeah. All right. Shall we do another question?
Yeah, yeah. Let me read this out. Uh, I will try and repeat. Or, Oris, Oristat
Or stat
Design?
design? Yeah, I think so.
Oristat Design. That's what the username is. This is another Reddit post, and it says I'm not going to read the entirety. Maybe I'll just read the first couple of lines. Um, Teams are not reading design system guidelines. I've been
Tisk
working on
tisk.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Truancy, whoever. Like, I'm wagging my finger right now. um, I've been working as a UX designer at a Fortune 50 company for close to 5 years now. Over the past 2 or 3 years, we've rolled out a beta design system and more recently launched the official design system, which will continue to be expanded upon. All of the guidelines live on an internal website, so it's easy for designers to access. The guidelines are more focused on component usage and UX guidelines. We also I have a team that focuses on the visual design guidelines, uh, more page layout. Okay. Um, those guidelines exist in a Figma prototype presentation. Um, they go on to talk about basically people aren't reading the guidelines and how to educate teams to really utilize the information that's available to them. Anyone have experience with this? Now, I'm going to jump in and say, yes, I've had experience with this. Um, and twofold, because, from a designer perspective, by default, the designers will just pick up that component directly out of Figma and start going for it, going hell for leather. And then on the other side of the coin, developers will npm install the package, search for button, start throwing button in, hoping TypeScript will save them and do that kind of stuff. And it doesn't work, surprisingly. They'll be like, oh, what? Well, how does this work? Where are these methods and stuff like that? And it doesn't matter how well you design or point them to the documentation, you will, by a certain portion, experience this kind of issue of people not reading the docs and taking the time. Um, and it's kind of a slow educational thing. Once people get on board with it, and once you keep sharing the link and saying, here's the docs for this, here's the docs for that, people start understanding the logic of where to find out about that kind of stuff. And I think like perseverance, not only in terms of pushing the design system star guide to your team, but also persistence in expanding that documentation and being as detailed as possible. So when they search for stuff, it comes up all the time. Like the success rate of finding the answer in there, as opposed to the success rate of going, oh, I can't find it in the Figma file. Let me just ask some randomer in Slack. Like, if they have more success asynchronously in the style guide docs, then eventually they will adopt it as part of their kind of resource package. Well, what do you think, Michelle? Am I
Yeah, I
talking
like that
rubbish?
perspective of like success to answers, right? Like I didn't think of it that way because I think of it as, yeah, definitely perseverance and, education. And I think that's the other thing is like a lot of times design system people want to be helpful because you don't want to be like a roadblock. So if someone asks you a question about, oh, how do I use button groups? You'll say the answer, but instead you can send them a link to your documentation saying like,
Mm-hmm.
here's the explanation. Let me know if you have any questions. So you're still being helpful, but you're also coaching people to go to the documentation. So I think that's super important. But yeah, you're right. Like I think like I don't know when I used to get video games and they come with instructions and you're just like I don't have time for this. I'll just like play and start smashing buttons and figure it out. Right. Like that's very much the same behavior with design systems. Um, so yeah, there is a certain extent that people aren't going to read documentation, but I think if you can make documentation a part of the natural culture. So, during design critiques, reference that, or just keep talking about the documentation, which might sound a little repetitive, but that's that perseverance and persistence. But also making the documentation valuable. So, I think accessibility guidelines and how things function when it comes to accessibility, that documentation is a great place to put that. So if valuable information like that lives there, um, they'll be read. But at the same time, like I think it's kind of hard because I feel like documentation to some extent is like Wikipedia. Like no one's going there to like read Wikipedia from end to end. Well, maybe there are very few, a rare portion, but most people just like are trying to reference it, right? So um, after you know how to use a button a good number of times, you're probably not gonna need to reference it as much. So,
Mm.
I think kind of understanding why people aren't using the documentation, is it because they are familiar with the component versus they're just not using it because nobody reads the instructions, right? So, trying to figure that out as well, but I think it's just it's like a behavior change of some sort, and I think just kind of reiterating documentation and having trust in it. So I think that goes to your point, Dave, of having success with the content. Um, Building that trust with the content is really important. If they know that they can go to the documentation and it's reliable, then they'll go to it. Because I remember at one point it was such a pain to maintain our documentation, so we didn't. So when people did go to it, they were like, "This is so out of date," so they didn't trust it anymore. Um, and I don't blame them for that. So
Mm.
um, all right. So let's go to this next question. I kind of like laughed at this, but not really. Maybe I cringed. So user, this is from Reddit as well. User Radion asks how to fix quote unquote multiple design systems. Um, hey y'all, I need some help. This is my second product design gig, and frankly, I feel in way over my head. Low key have nightmares about clicking a component and ruining every instance of it. poor, poor person. Um, I've been given the task that can basically be summed up into fix our design system, quote unquote. They currently have their foundations and components split between two, both rather large files, and design systems called large and small. um, I'm suggesting that we create one foundations library consisting of colors, spacings, elevation, typography, icons, radius. This would also be the main hub for all of our styles, variables, and most importantly, the variable modes and tokens that exist across both of the current libraries. Then we create a component library file that consists of both the large and small variants for their components. This can have the foundation library published to it, but creates a level of separation. And they want to know, does this sound like a good plan? Also, how do I go about combining components across files without breaking all of their instances?
Woof.
I feel like
I
this is a nightmare.
It sounds, yeah, it sounds like the whole, because they talk about like split between two, and then they say large and small, and I'm like, well, first thought would be like large and small would be like mobile and desktop, but like, is that small and large, or like, does it mean something else of like sizing or something? Anyway, I so my proposal would be to work in complete isolation in another like document in Figma to catalog everything that's required, like everything that you can find and source of everything, and then start turning that into kind of the base level design system tokens, shall we say, or tokens and components or all that kind of stuff as like a base level thing. And then probably what I would do is compare that to what's already there as like what you can source is like the keys for everything or the tokens for everything. And then the final thing would be to take maybe like duplicate Figma files that already exist that are quite heavy handed in using those tokens, and test swapping it. Like you can do that in Figma, can't you? You can kind of
Yeah.
repoint to another like library and then see what breaks as like a test, just to see how it plays out. Um, because then you can kind of safely do that to kind of see what happens. But you are going to break a few eggs, as they say. So I would there will be a cutoff point before you're just going to like, I gotta pull the band-aid.
Yeah. It's like tread with caution. I don't know. It's interesting. Part of me, I'm like, this whole situation, if this person is new to product design, I think the company is my assumption is that the company doesn't fully understand design systems. Like they know they should use it, but they don't understand like the magnitude of what they're asking this entry level product designer.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Like there's a reason why companies have design system teams and and they're full of people with various levels of experience from entry to very seasoned. Um, but yeah, I think so I feel bad for this individual for sure, but
Mm.
glad that they feel like interested in doing this. I feel like I would have quit.
They've run for the hills.
Yeah. But maybe that's just because I'm more seasoned and know like what the effort takes. Because I think part of it's like level setting expectations to see like, hey, this is going to take some time, and kind of mapping out like an approach, like you said. I think, um, you know, organizing. It sounds like files are pretty big, so like because usually like some people like will create like foundations in the file and the components in the same file. Um, but I guess if they're this big, like foundations and like a foundations file and a component file is fine. But I think it's one of those things that you kind of build the design system, the new version, the consolidated one,
Mm.
and while people are still working on their current projects, and then at some point draw a line in the sand saying anything new in this sprint will start using the new UI kit. Anything that has been delivered or is like 90% done in the old design system, just finish that off, and not use the new kit, but then going forward, everything new. Or if stuff is in flight and it makes more sense to convert to the new kit, um, maybe that's something that you do. I think just because it's really hard to transition and swap out, and things can get really confusing because um, you don't know what you might accidentally break, or um, you're not really sure like how things have been delivered, and if people like disconnected instances, like detached instances. So even if you swap stuff can get funky. Um, but yeah, I would first level set with with managers about the scope of this project. Um,
I see. I think you might be looking at it maybe from like real big enterprise company, and we don't know where Radeon Radeon works. So it could be somewhat of a smaller company, or a company that doesn't actually embrace
true.
design systems that hard, and that might be why that they want to fix it, is that they don't they don't commit to it very much, and that it could be seen as an opportunity. Maybe that's why they're still there. Is that they're gonna look pretty good if anybody adopts the design system inside the Figma file. So you know um, I'm looking at it with rose tinted glasses, but
Yeah, no,
there's a
that's a
lot
good
to,
point.
there's a lot to unpack. But maybe we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so yeah, another question from Reddit, from Roof Professional 1530. um, is being a design systems is being a systems designer easier than being a product designer? Sorry, I read systems designer, and I thought of the like designing systems as
Yeah.
like an engineer type thing, but they mean it as a design systems designer. Would love to hear your thoughts, opinions. I have limited knowledge in regards to design systems, but it seems like being a product designer is potentially more difficult than being a design systems designer because you have more subjective inputs and stakeholder opinions to balance when it comes to the design of a lot of exerted trying. Oh goodness me, it's a long sentence. Um, when it comes to design, and a lot of effort is exerted trying to find the most objective balance between business considerations, user testing, opinions of other designers, etc. With design systems, it seems like day-to-day work is mostly centered around documentation and maintaining a library of components for the team to use. Curious what the day-to-day work looks like for a design systems designer. If the team isn't implementing changes to existing components, what does their day-to-day work consist of? I'll cut it off there, but this is almost like a contentious question in this space. Is that like, is it like, I mean, from my opinion of somebody who worked on it for like a good few years, is that it's not easier, it's just different. Like, I'm not gonna, that's the far too diplomatic answer, but it is true. It is true. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into like maintaining and expanding and ensuring like you're like, I know for a fact as being as like a designer inside of um Figma when you're doing design systems work is that you end up partially like an engineer. You're engineering components inside of Figma, just like that person in the previous question. Like they're engineering components inside of Figma, so they behave how they designers expect to when you drag it wider and more narrow. You imagine a table gets really complicated, but like going back to the question, you kind of are doing like twofold what a product designer would be doing is that not only do you have to create componentry and tokens and variables and everything for the internal team, but in turn, those components get used by the customer, like the person who interacts with the website or interacts with the application. So now you're having to appease two levels of people. So you have to appease people inside of the company and then appease people outside of the company. And you're so abstracted away that it makes it like quite difficult to kind of know what people are going to use them for at that distance. It's a bit like building you kind of meta level, so it makes it very difficult to kind of know the final end use case. Whereas product design, you're a little bit more to the metal of, and that metal being like the customer experience. Like research is more accurate. You can kind of glean more value from like what customers are saying to you and say, oh, well, I can just move the button to the right because they wanted it over to the right. Whereas design system stuff is like it's more abstracted. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like I don't this is an interesting question, and I feel like their perspective of like design systems and you're just like documenting and maintaining components like the Figma component like architecture engineering aspect is really complicated, but like I feel like that is more time consuming because a lot of people say they don't have time to document. So I feel like that's a myth. Your day-to-day work is not documenting because you don't have time for it. But I think you're right. Like it's different, right? And I think what are people more interested in? Because I think with design systems, you're definitely having to do a lot more like selling of the design system and reminding and championing the design system um, versus like thinking about just a product feature. But at the same time, like as a design system designer, it can be very um, like I don't know, I guess, like, it can get really, really challenging because you have to think of, like, if we change this component, how will it affect all the other products that use the component? And you don't know how all the products are being used because 'cause you're not, working on the actual feature work, but that's where you have,
Mm,
like, a team of people you can reach out to and get feedback from. But, um I think there's a lot more decision, like, the decisions seem a lot more, like, heavily weighted for design system designers. because you have to think about a lot of things. And then it seems like this person's experience with like being a product designer, getting like those subjective inputs from stakeholders, like I think that can be, it depends on how opinionated your stakeholders are, I guess. Some of them are very opinionated, which can make things very difficult, and some are not, which makes things easier. So I guess it really just depends on like what the culture is and the teams that you're working on, and what you're working on too. But it's different.
Yeah, I will say as well that that thinking about where they might have worked in the past is that they may have worked at companies that were a lot smaller and didn't warrant a design system. Like maybe they worked at a product company that was so small that like design system was like either not necessary or just not affordable in terms of
Or
the
you just make
company.
components.
Yeah, you just make the throw components, or you just stick a variables like object into the JavaScript application, job done, or something. Um, or you worked at like an agency, and like those companies definitely don't have affordability for like a design system, or more highly likely. Um, and like as you get to a company size where a design system is warranted, like suddenly all the work becomes more so, and like there isn't like the work isn't thinned out across the company. It's just like there is more work because the company's bigger, and so now more jobs are required to like deal with all of those cases. Like you imagine just an input component having been used across the board of all these different applications. Like that input component is now doing way more heavy lifting than you ever thought of. So it's different work, like you say.
Yeah. I know we're out of time, but I kind of want to answer this last question. So,
Yeah.
um, let's do it. Okay. This one is from Pesci, semantic naming. I'm working on typography within our design system. We are working out the semantic naming of our text styles. This is the first time I've done this, although I've worked on other design systems. My question is, how detailed do you go with the naming of semantic tokens for typography? One example from a meeting I had today, there is a large price on a card component. Think of a sales type page. This could be a heading style, or should this be a price? But then if we wanted to have a heading in the same style later, would that exact same style be added in two places with different names? Um, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean they're exposing the issue of like if you name it for what it's for, you start making a rod for your own back. It's a bit like I don't know, oh, because then you do have primary and secondary for like colors quite often, and they're quite a good use case. But then being calling it like price or like its purpose or having like too much of a meaning behind it makes it quite difficult to untie it from what that is. Like we when we named tokens at Nord Health, like they were kind of based on like a set of taxonomies, and they were based on a bit like CSS, but then extra stuff around the sides as well, because variables tend to be quite synonymous with CSS when you're doing web development. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't use the price name. I would try and think of something a bit more ambiguous. Um, but then if you're getting into that level of thing, you can have that kind of concept of like two level like variable names where you have like the meta level and then you have the kind of named tokens. I can't remember what that concept is, but there are like
The
two tiers.
like the tiers, yeah. So like you could have core tokens, which are like the foundations, like I don't know, heading large, heading small.
Mm,
Um, and then the semantic ones would be for like the specific use case. So like price could reference heading large, and maybe I don't know, screen title can also reference heading large. But um like that's one way. I think but the I guess the cautionary tale is like consider how complicated things could get. Um because I see a lot of like other design systems, and while you think that a company of that size would want to make things more discreet and complicated. They don't. They just keep like some very basic tokens. They have a lot of basic tokens, but they're not semantic to a particular situation. Um, but I think on the Nordhealth design system, like I really like the documentation that describes like naming convention and gives like best practices on how to name
Mm.
things. Because I think that can help. REI also has like a little bit of a section on their tokens on how to name things as well, which might be helpful in terms of like trying to wrap your head on how to name these things, because a lot of times design systems will just list the tokens and not really explain how they've named them. Um, but yeah, it can get messy. Um, All right. So we are definitely a little over. Thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit longer. Hope you enjoyed this episode where we took on the interesting questions from the internet about design systems. If you have questions for us later on, feel free to drop us a line in our Slack channel or reach out to us at community at zeroheight if email is your jam. And we'll be back next time with episode 19. They downsize the design system team. How do we